Hey, have you ever wanted to make tiered obbies? But do you suck at studio, or you're so used to making towers that you can't imagine an obby without a client object every third jump? Well, this video is the best one you could possibly ask for. It's like it descended out of heaven and came into your computer to help you make the best tiered obbies known to man. In this video, I'm going to go over a list of do's and don'ts when it comes to design and gameplay when it comes to tiered obbies. I'll cover everything you could possibly need. However, this video does assume that you're used to Studio in some way, so I won't be going over the basics. If you're not used to Studio, I would advise making basic obbies first so that you have a grasp of how it works. Let's get right into it. So if you know what a tiered obby is, skip to the time that I'm currently showing on screen. However, if you're used to JTO or you're new to Studio, a tiered obby is basically an obby that consists of... It's a relatively short obby. It has 20 to 30 jumps usually, however some can be shorter and some can be longer. The main catch of a tiered obby is that it is fully purist. It uses no client objects, you've got no spinners, beat blocks, anything like that is not usually used in tiered obbies. However, you can use them sparingly. For example, some tiered obbies do have beat blocks, but it's commonplace to use completely purist gameplay. When you're making your first obby, I would advise to stick to purist gameplay and not go too far out of your comfort zone, as it may lead to the obby being uncomfortable or unenjoyable to play. The main thing you need to keep in mind when making gameplay is that it has to be sight-readable and enjoyable. If your gameplay is hard to understand, is cramped, or it's uncomfortable to play, people are not going to enjoy your obby. Do not make obbies that have tight walls everywhere. Keep it open so people can see where they're meant to go. Of course, you can include lodges in your obby, which are small gaps 1.5 studs apart. However, you should use them sparingly and not make the entire obby filled with them, as people will not enjoy having to pan their camera to look at every jump. If you're making a tiered obby that's in the easier side of difficulty, you'll want to make sure that the entire obby can be sight-read in one run. You don't want people failing to things that are out of their control, like gameplay such as head hitters that they can't see normally. This is unfair and will turn people off from the obby. What you want to do is make sure that every jump is done the way it appears to be when you look at it for the first time. For example, if you have a wraparound, you just have to do a wraparound. If there's a truss jump, then you just have to flick off or shift off. Don't overcomplicate things if you're making obbies below tier 13. In addition, when you're new to obby building, you want to have a consistent theme in mind. Don't make random stuff that comes into your head. Keep everything fairly consistent in design style and gameplay style. For example, if you're making an obby that has basic wraparounds, jumps, and truss jumps, don't immediately throw in some complicated tech-based gameplay. It's going to throw people off, and people will most likely find it as a choke point, which is not a good thing. However, if you're making an obby that has a lot of tech, you can occasionally throw in easier jumps. My main advice is if you're making a complicated obby, you can occasionally undercomplicate it, but don't make random techy strat-based jumps in a simple basic linear obby. One example of an obby that uses rotation and variety in a way to keep the player engaged is Scarlet Paracosm by Maculads. It was released in 2020 and has a massive variety of interesting and unique jumps, from truss jumps to basic long jumps to tacky jumps to jumps that require strats to cam control jumps. It keeps the player engaged and interested throughout the entire obby masterfully. Even when there are jumps that would be considered basic, a slight rotation is enough to make it interesting. For example, this jump here would normally be a very basic wraparound. However, simply turning it slightly is enough to make it very interesting. This is a very simple trick that can be used in your obbies to make them unique. Don't overthink every jump. If you're struggling for jumps, just take a basic one and look what you can do to make it more interesting. The last thing you need to keep in mind when you're making your first obby is to not do jank. It is the worst mistake you could possibly make. Making jank gameplay requires a really deep knowledge of the Roblox physics engine. If you don't have that knowledge and you're a beginner, you're going to make an awful obby that no one wants to play. Jank is the hardest type of gameplay to get right, so don't do it as your first obby. Maybe when you've made a few good obbies, then you can attempt it. Alright, so now that you've got the basics of gameplay down, the second part of your obby that you need to consider is the design. Now, design isn't essential. Gameplay should always be your top priority, especially when making tiered obbies. However, an obby with a good atmosphere and amazing and detailed design is going to stick in people's minds much more than an obby with enjoyable gameplay and nothing else. Some obbies, like Honor, can have half-decent design but still be iconic. However, many of the best designed obbies, such as the obby I'm showing right now, Immaculate Path, Misplaced in Time, and Stairway to Heaven, are widely remembered mainly because of how intimidating they are, the atmosphere they have, or how beautiful and detailed the gameplay is. First off, you need to make sure that your obby actually looks good. Before worrying about atmosphere, you need to make sure that the colours you're choosing for your obby and the textures you're using are decent and not an eyesore. Using neon in your obby is not usually recommended unless you can make it work, as it's very blinding and people may not like staring at it for extended periods of time. The best and simplest way to go is to make dark obbies. These are less intensive on the eyes and people won't get annoyed by looking at them for extended periods of time. Good colours to go for are purple, green, blue, dark orange and dark red. Many obbies go with this because it's good to play it safe. You don't want to do anything extravagant for your first obby. If you want to play it safe, another idea you can do is to make the obby monochrome. Now people tend to dislike monochrome obbies as they're overused quite a lot, so it's best to sprinkle in some colour here and there. Now let's get into lighting effects you can use in studio to make your obbies look better. The first thing you should always do is add a skybox. Go into the toolbox and choose a sky that you like the look of and matches the colour of your obby. Just slap that in and you're done. On top of that, you can add objects into the lighting in your workspace in studio. Some of them may include atmosphere, which creates a foggy effect, depth of field, which makes your obby blurry if it's further away, color correction, which allows you to change the entire color of the obby relatively easily, including the skybox, and sun rays. But you should use the last two sparingly because they can be difficult to work with and can also make your obby look ugly in the end if you don't know how to use them properly. There's helpful tutorials on YouTube for how to use all of these. Now let's get into detailing. The best way to detail your obby is to use lots of 1 to 2 stub blocks to build up a sort of cave-like atmosphere. However, you can experiment however you want. If you're a JTO builder, you can carry over some of the things you may have learned from JTO towers into obbies. In the end, the best thing you can do is to play other obbies and get an idea of the design style you like the most. Then, try and mimic it. You won't want to copy other people's obbies all of the time, but it's a good way to build up knowledge of how to effectively design your obbies. Don't expect anything extravagant from your first time designing. You aren't going to make a masterpiece in a day. However, if you take it slow and build up your skill, you can eventually make beautiful obbies. Well, I hope the information I've given here will help you to venture into the world of tiered obbies. If you have any questions, make sure to comment down below and I'll respond to them as soon as I can. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed my videos, and I'd like to thank everyone for the support they've had for the last few commentary videos. Thank you very much and have a good day.